Sarah Martinez had always believed her hands were meant to heal, not to kill. Growing up in a small Texas town, she spent her teenage years volunteering at the local hospital, fascinated by the way doctors could bring people back from the edge of death. When she enlisted in the Army at 19, becoming a combat medic felt like the perfect way to serve her country while staying true to her calling. The Afghanistan deployment started like any other. Sarah carried her medical kit with the same reverence other soldiers carried their weapons. Her unit respected her skills, and she had earned their trust through countless missions where her quick thinking and steady hands had saved lives. She could patch a bullet wound in the back of a moving Humvee, perform emergency surgery in a dusty outpost, and keep a wounded soldier conscious long enough to reach proper medical care. Sarah's reputation preceded her wherever the unit went. Other medics sought her advice, and even the hardened infantry soldiers spoke about her with genuine admiration. She had this unique ability to remain calm under pressure, her voice steady and reassuring even when chaos erupted around them. Her medical bag was organized with military precision. Every tool and bandage in its exact place, ready for any emergency. The forward operating base where Sarah was stationed buzzed with constant activity. Helicopters landed and took off at all hours, bringing in wounded soldiers and supplies. The medical tent was her domain, a place where she felt completely in control. She had set up the space according to her own system, ensuring everything was within arm's reach during critical moments. What made Sarah different from other medics wasn't just her technical skill, but her ability to connect with wounded soldiers. She would talk to them during treatment, keeping them focused on her voice rather than their pain. Many soldiers later said that Sarah's calm presence was what got them through their darkest moments. She had this gift of making people feel safe, even in the middle of a war zone. Her commanding officers had noticed her exceptional performance and were already discussing recommendations for advanced medical training. Sarah dreamed of becoming a physician assistant after her service, maybe even a doctor. She had plans, goals, and a clear vision of her future in medicine. Nothing in her background suggested she had any interest in or aptitude for combat operations beyond her medical duties. The other soldiers in her unit came from diverse backgrounds, but they all shared a deep respect for Sarah's dedication. She would often stay up late studying medical journals and practicing new techniques. Her bunk area was filled with medical textbooks, anatomy charts, and notebooks filled with her careful handwriting, documenting every case she had handled. Sarah's family back home worried about her constantly, but they were incredibly proud of her service. Her mother would send care packages filled with medical supplies that Sarah had requested, along with homemade cookies that she shared with her unit. Her father, a Vietnam veteran himself, understood the importance of her work and often wrote letters encouraging her to stay focused on saving lives. The day that would change everything started like any other. Sarah woke before dawn, as was her habit, and began preparing for the day's mission. She checked her medical supplies, reviewed the mission briefing, and mentally prepared herself for whatever casualties might come her way. The mission seemed routine, a patrol through a village where intelligence suggested minimal enemy activity. As she loaded her gear into the transport vehicle, Sarah felt the familiar mix of anxiety and determination that came before every mission. She had developed her own pre-mission ritual, checking her equipment twice, saying a quiet prayer, and reminding herself that her job was to bring everyone home alive. She had no idea that this particular mission would test her in ways she had never imagined, and that her steady hands would soon be called upon to do something she had never trained for. The patrol convoy moved through the dusty Afghan countryside with practiced efficiency. Sarah sat in the medical vehicle, her gear secured and her mind focused on the terrain ahead. The landscape was deceptively peaceful, with rolling hills and scattered villages that looked almost serene in the morning light. But Sarah had learned during her deployment that appearances could be deadly in this part of the world. Corporal Jenkins, the driver, made small talk to ease the tension that always preceded missions. He had been in country for 8 months and had developed a nervous habit of humming old rock songs when things got quiet. Sarah appreciated his attempts to keep the mood light, but her attention remained fixed on monitoring the radio chatter between the vehicles in their convoy. The first sign of trouble came through the radio as sharp, urgent voices reporting movement in the hills ahead. Sarah immediately began mentally cataloging her supplies and preparing for potential casualties. She had learned to read the tone of radio communications, and something in the squad leader's voice told her this wasn't going to be a routine patrol after all. When the first shots rang out, Sarah's training kicked in automatically. The convoy came under attack from multiple positions in the rocky hills surrounding the road. Enemy fighters had chosen their ambush site carefully, using the natural terrain to create a deadly crossfire. The sound of automatic weapons filled the air, punctuated by the distinctive crack of sniper rounds hitting the armored vehicles. Sarah's vehicle took cover behind a large boulder formation while she prepared to treat casualties. The radio crackled with urgent calls for medical assistance from multiple positions. 2 soldiers were down in the lead vehicle and another was wounded in the rear. The enemy fire was too intense for her to reach them safely, but Sarah knew she had to try. As she gathered her medical bag and prepared to move, a sniper round shattered the rear window of her vehicle. The enemy marksman had found an elevated position that gave him a clear view of the entire convoy. Every time an American soldier tried to move, precise rifle fire forced them back into cover. The situation was becoming desperate. Corporal Jenkins was hit in the shoulder as he tried to establish a firing position. Sarah immediately began treating his wound, working quickly while staying low to avoid the sniper's attention. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone, but Jenkins was losing blood rapidly. As she worked, Sarah could hear the frustrated voices of her teammates over the radio, unable to advance or retreat because of the sniper's dominant position. The wounded soldiers in the other vehicles were calling for help, but the medics couldn't reach them. Sarah realized that the sniper wasn't just picking off targets randomly. He was specifically targeting anyone who tried to provide medical aid or coordinate the American response. This was a calculated tactic designed to cause maximum psychological impact on the trapped soldiers. Sarah finished bandaging Jenkins and turned her attention to the tactical situation. Through her medical training, she had developed an understanding of anatomy and physiology that gave her insights into how injuries affected combat effectiveness. But now she found herself thinking about the problem from a different angle, analyzing the sniper's position and considering the physics of long-range shooting. The enemy marksman had chosen his position well, but Sarah noticed something that the other soldiers had missed. The sniper was firing from a location that required him to expose himself slightly when targeting certain areas of the convoy. It was a small vulnerability, but it might be enough for someone with the right skills and equipment to exploit. Sarah had grown up hunting with her father in the Texas Hill Country. She understood rifle mechanics, wind calculation, and long-range shooting fundamentals. Her father had been a competitive marksman before his military service, and he had passed those skills on to his daughter. But Sarah had always seen those abilities as recreational skills, never imagining they might be relevant to her military service as a medic. The realization hit her suddenly. She might be the only person in the convoy with the shooting skills necessary to neutralize the sniper threat. The other soldiers were trained for close-quarters combat and assault tactics, but none of them had extensive experience with precision long-range shooting. Sarah found herself facing an impossible choice between her identity as a healer and the desperate need to save her fellow soldiers' lives. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for Sergeant Miller's sniper rifle. He had been knocked unconscious when their vehicle hit an improvised explosive device during the initial ambush, and his precision weapon lay unused beside him. The weight of the rifle felt foreign in her hands, so different from the medical instruments she was accustomed to carrying. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was wrong, that her hands were meant to save lives, not take them. The enemy sniper fired again, and Sarah heard the distinctive sound of the bullet striking metal somewhere in the convoy. Over the radio, desperate voices called out coordinates and casualty reports. 3 soldiers were now wounded and unable to receive medical attention because of the sniper's strategic position. Sarah realized that her hesitation was costing lives, and that sometimes saving lives required making impossible choices. Sarah had never fired a rifle in combat, but her childhood hunting experience had taught her the fundamentals of long-range shooting. Her father had drilled into her the importance of breathing control, trigger discipline, and reading environmental conditions. Those weekend hunting trips in Texas had seemed like simple father-daughter bonding time, but now those skills represented the difference between life and death for her fellow soldiers. The enemy marksman was positioned approximately 400 meters away on a rocky outcrop that provided excellent cover and concealment. Sarah could see the muzzle flash from his rifle when he fired, but actually hitting such a small target at that distance required skills she had only used on deer and targets back home. The wind was gusting unpredictably through the valley, and she would have to calculate for bullet drop over the extended range. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and tried to channel everything her father had taught her about precision shooting. She remembered his patient voice explaining how to read wind patterns by watching vegetation and dust. She recalled the feeling of surprise when the rifle fired, the way her father had taught her to squeeze the trigger so smoothly that the shot came as a complete surprise even to herself. Opening her eyes, Sarah began to study the terrain around the sniper's position. She could see small clouds of dust being kicked up by the wind, and she noticed how the vegetation moved in patterns that revealed the air currents. Her medical training had given her an excellent understanding of anatomy and physiology, knowledge that translated surprisingly well to understanding the mechanics of long-range shooting and the effects of various factors on bullet trajectory. The first shot would be critical. If Sarah missed, the enemy sniper would immediately know that someone was targeting him specifically, and he would likely change position or increase his rate of fire. She would have only one opportunity to end the threat and allow medical evacuation of the wounded soldiers. The pressure was enormous, but Sarah forced herself to focus on the technical aspects of the shot rather than the moral implications of what she was about to do. Sarah adjusted the rifle's scope for the estimated range and began the breathing pattern her father had taught her. She found a stable shooting position using her medical bag as a rest, unconsciously applying the same steady-handed precision she used during delicate medical procedures. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was using her medical equipment to support a weapon instead of healing instruments. The enemy sniper fired again, and Sarah used the muzzle flash to confirm his exact position. She could see him clearly through the scope now, a figure in earth-toned clothing lying prone behind a rock formation. For a moment, Sarah hesitated as she realized she was looking at another human being, someone who probably had a family waiting for him to come home. But then she heard another urgent medical call over the radio, and she knew that her compassion for the enemy couldn't override her duty to her fellow soldiers. Sarah's breathing steadied as she settled into the familiar rhythm her father had taught her. She calculated the wind drift based on the movement of dust and vegetation, estimated the bullet drop for the 400-meter range, and placed the crosshairs slightly high and to the left of her target. Her finger found the trigger, and she began the slow, steady pressure that would send a single bullet across the valley. The moment stretched endlessly as Sarah prepared to cross a line she had never imagined crossing. Her identity as a healer was about to collide with the harsh realities of combat, and she knew that regardless of the outcome, she would never be quite the same person again. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders as she realized that the lives of multiple soldiers depended entirely on her ability to make this one perfect shot. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed through the valley. Sarah felt the recoil against her shoulder and watched through the scope as her bullet found its target. The enemy sniper's rifle went silent and his position became motionless. For a moment, Sarah stared through the scope in disbelief at what she had accomplished, her hands still steady on the weapon despite the magnitude of what had just happened. The immediate silence that followed the shot was almost deafening. The enemy's automatic weapons continued firing from other positions, but the precise, deadly threat of the sniper had been eliminated. Sarah set down the rifle with hands that barely trembled and immediately grabbed her medical bag. There was no time to process what she had done. Wounded soldiers needed her attention, and that took priority over everything else. Sarah sprinted across the open ground toward the lead vehicle where 2 soldiers lay wounded. The enemy fighters in the hills continued to fire, but without their sniper's overwatch, their accuracy was significantly reduced. Sarah reached the first wounded soldier, Private Rodriguez, who had taken shrapnel to his leg and abdomen. His injuries were serious but not immediately life-threatening if she could control the bleeding quickly. Working with practiced efficiency, Sarah applied pressure bandages and administered pain medication, while bullets whined overhead. Her medical training took complete control, and she found herself able to compartmentalize the shooting incident entirely. Rodriguez was conscious and talking, which was a good sign, but he had lost a significant amount of blood and needed immediate evacuation to a field hospital. The second wounded soldier, Specialist Thompson, was in worse condition. He had taken a direct hit from the sniper before Sarah's intervention, and the bullet had passed through his shoulder, causing significant damage to blood vessels and nerves. Sarah worked quickly to stabilize him, using her combat medical training to prioritize the most critical injuries while preparing him for transport. As Sarah worked on Thompson, she became aware that the other soldiers were staring at her with something approaching awe. Word had spread quickly through the convoy about her impossible shot, and everyone understood that her actions had saved multiple lives. But Sarah was too focused on her medical duties to pay attention to their reactions. She had wounded soldiers to treat, and that was the only thing that mattered to her in that moment. The convoy's commanding officer, Captain Williams, coordinated the tactical response while Sarah handled medical duties. The enemy fighters were withdrawing from their positions, apparently demoralized by the loss of their sniper and the Americans' ability to strike back at long range. The immediate threat was diminishing, but several soldiers still required urgent medical attention. Sarah moved between wounded soldiers with calm efficiency, triaging injuries and providing treatment based on medical priorities, rather than the dramatic circumstances of how she had eliminated the sniper threat. Her identity as a medic reasserted itself completely, and she found comfort in returning to the role she understood and had trained for extensively. The helicopter evacuation arrived within 30 minutes, and Sarah accompanied the most seriously wounded soldiers to the field hospital. During the flight, she continued monitoring their vital signs and adjusting their treatment as needed. Thompson's condition had stabilized, and Rodriguez was conscious and asking about his teammates. Both men would recover fully, thanks largely to Sarah's quick medical response after neutralizing the threat. At the field hospital, Sarah briefed the surgical team on each patient's condition and the treatment she had provided. The doctors were impressed with her field work and the quality of care she had delivered under extremely difficult circumstances. They had heard rumors about the medic who had made an impossible sniper shot, but to Sarah, that seemed less important than ensuring her patients received proper follow-up care. As Sarah cleaned her equipment and restocked her medical supplies, she tried to process what had happened during the mission. She had taken a life to save lives, crossing a moral boundary she had never expected to face. The contradiction between her role as a healer and what she had been forced to do created an internal conflict that would take time to resolve. The other soldiers in her unit looked at her differently now. There was respect, certainly, but also a kind of amazement that bordered on disbelief. Sarah Martinez, the quiet medic from Texas who spent her free time reading medical journals, had made a shot that even trained snipers would have found challenging. Word of her actions was already spreading beyond her immediate unit, and Sarah sensed that her military career was about to take an unexpected turn. Word of Sarah's extraordinary shot traveled through military channels faster than she could have imagined. Within 48 hours, officers from multiple units were requesting details about the incident. The official after-action report described her actions in dry, technical language, but the story that spread among the troops was far more dramatic. A combat medic had made a 400-meter shot with a borrowed rifle, eliminating a trained sniper who had pinned down an entire convoy. Sarah tried to maintain her normal routine, focusing on her medical duties and avoiding the attention her actions had generated, but it was impossible to ignore the way other soldiers looked at her now. There was a mixture of respect, curiosity, and something close to disbelief in their expressions. Some approached her with questions about her shooting background, while others seemed almost intimidated by what she had accomplished. The psychological impact of taking a life began to affect Sarah in ways she hadn't expected. During quiet moments, she found herself replaying the shot over and over, wondering about the person she had killed and questioning whether there might have been another way to resolve the situation. Her medical training had prepared her to deal with trauma in patients, but not the moral complexity of being responsible for someone's death. Captain Williams called Sarah into his office 3 days after the incident. She expected a routine debriefing, but instead found herself facing questions about her shooting experience and whether she had ever considered specialized training. The captain explained that her actions had attracted attention from higher command levels, and there were discussions about how to best utilize her unique combination of medical expertise and marksmanship skills. Sarah's response was immediate and firm. She was a medic, not a sniper, and she had no interest in changing her military specialty. The shot she had made was a desperate measure in an emergency situation, not an indication that she wanted to pursue a combat role. Her passion was saving lives, not taking them, and she hoped to return to her medical duties without further discussion of her shooting abilities. But the military had different ideas. Within a week, Sarah received orders to report for evaluation by a special operations assessment team. The evaluation would determine whether she might be suitable for advanced training programs that combined medical and tactical skills. Sarah protested the orders through her chain of command, but was told that the assessment was mandatory and that her preferences would be considered. After the evaluation was complete, the assessment took place at a secure facility where Sarah was tested on everything from physical fitness to psychological resilience. The evaluators were particularly interested in her shooting skills, putting her through increasingly complex marksmanship challenges. Despite her reluctance to participate, Sarah's natural ability was undeniable. She consistently outperformed candidates who had years of specialized training. During the psychological evaluation, Sarah was honest about her conflicted feelings regarding the shooting incident. She explained her identity as a healer and her discomfort with the idea of intentionally taking lives. The psychologist noted her responses, but seemed more interested in her ability to perform under pressure than her personal reservations. About combat roles, the most challenging part of the assessment involved scenario-based exercises where Sarah had to make split-second decisions about when to use medical skills versus tactical skills. The evaluators created situations where her ability to eliminate threats might be necessary to save wounded soldiers. Despite her moral reservations, Sarah found herself naturally excelling at these complex decision-making challenges. Sarah's performance during the assessment was exceptional, but she remained adamant about her desire to continue serving as a combat medic. She had joined the military to save lives, and that mission hadn't changed despite her demonstrated ability with a rifle. The assessment team noted her preferences but recommended her for a specialized program that would allow her to serve in both capacities. The final meeting with the assessment team revealed the military's true intentions. They weren't trying to remove her from medical duties, but rather to train her for specialized missions, where her unique combination of skills would be invaluable. These missions would involve providing medical support to elite units while also serving as a backup sniper when necessary. It was a role that had never existed before, created specifically for someone with her unusual qualifications. Sarah listened to the proposal with growing unease. The program would mean leaving her current unit and the soldiers she had grown to care about. It would also mean accepting a role that acknowledged her lethal capabilities, something that conflicted with her self-image as a healer. Yet she also understood that her unique skills could save lives in ways that traditional medical training alone could not. The decision deadline approached, and Sarah found herself torn between her personal convictions and the potential to serve in a capacity that could have significant impact. Her fellow soldiers encouraged her to accept the opportunity, recognizing that her abilities were too valuable to waste. But Sarah struggled with the idea of intentionally developing skills designed to take lives, even if the ultimate goal was to save them. Sarah's first mission with the Navy SEALs came 6 months after she reluctantly accepted the specialized training program. The training had been intense, combining advanced medical techniques with precision shooting skills that went far beyond anything she had learned growing up in Texas. She had mastered long-range ballistics, advanced trauma surgery, and tactical movement as part of a cohesive unit. Despite her reservations, Sarah had excelled in every aspect of the program. The SEAL team she was assigned to support had been initially skeptical about working with someone who was primarily a medic. These were elite warriors who had operated together for years, and they weren't sure how to integrate someone whose primary mission was medical support rather than direct action. Their previous missions had relied on traditional combat medics who stayed in protected positions while the SEALs handled tactical operations. Team leader Lieutenant Commander Jackson briefed Sarah on their current mission. Extracting a captured intelligence asset from a heavily fortified compound in enemy territory, the operation would require precision, stealth, and the ability to adapt quickly when things went wrong. Sarah's role was to provide medical support for any casualties and serve as backup sniper if the team's primary marksman was compromised. The insertion went smoothly, with the team moving through mountainous terrain under cover of darkness. Sarah carried both her medical equipment and a precision rifle, the weight of dual responsibilities evident in every step. She had trained extensively for this moment, but actually operating with elite special forces felt completely different from any training scenario she had experienced. The compound was situated in a valley surrounded by steep hills that provided excellent overwatch positions. The SEAL's primary sniper, Petty Officer Collins, established a position that covered the main approach routes, while Sarah was positioned to cover alternative escape routes and provide medical support if extraction became necessary. The plan was straightforward, but Sarah knew from experience that no plan survived contact with the enemy. Everything went wrong simultaneously. The intelligence asset was being moved just as the SEALs reached the compound, forcing them to improvise their approach. Enemy guards spotted movement and raised an alarm, turning a stealth mission into a running firefight. Collins took a hit from enemy fire and was unable to continue providing overwatch support, leaving the team exposed to counterattack from elevated positions. Sarah found herself facing the same impossible choice she had encountered months earlier: watch her teammates die, or use her rifle to eliminate threats. This time, however, she was better prepared both technically and mentally. Her training had taught her to compartmentalize the moral complexity of her dual role and focus on the immediate tactical situation. The first shot Sarah took eliminated an enemy fighter who was preparing to ambush the SEAL extraction team. The second and third shots cleared a path for the team to reach their objective. Each shot was precise, calculated, and devastatingly effective. Sarah had developed into a marksman whose skills rivaled those of dedicated snipers, while retaining all of her medical expertise. The extraction became a running battle through difficult terrain, with Sarah alternating between providing sniper support and treating wounded team members. Petty Officer Martinez had taken shrapnel to his leg, requiring immediate field treatment to prevent him from going into shock. Sarah stabilized him while continuing to engage enemy targets that threatened the team's escape route. Lieutenant Commander Jackson watched in amazement as Sarah seamlessly transitioned between her dual roles. One moment she was precisely engaging enemy targets at extended range, and the next she was performing complex medical procedures under fire. Her ability to switch between these completely different skill sets was unlike anything he had encountered in his military career. The helicopter extraction point was compromised, forcing the team to move to an alternative location while under constant enemy pressure. Sarah's marksmanship skills proved crucial in keeping pursuing forces at bay, while her medical expertise kept the wounded team members mobile. The combination of skills that had once seemed contradictory now proved to be exactly what the mission required. As the extraction helicopter lifted off, carrying the rescued intelligence asset and the SEAL team to safety, Lieutenant Commander Jackson realized that Sarah represented something entirely new in special operations. She wasn't just a medic who could shoot, or a sniper who knew first aid. She was a completely integrated operator whose medical knowledge enhanced her tactical abilities and whose tactical skills made her medical interventions more effective. The debrief session that followed the mission was unlike any Sarah had experienced. The SEALs, who had been initially skeptical about working with her, now spoke about her performance with genuine admiration. They had witnessed someone who could save lives and take lives with equal skill, adapting instantly to whatever the situation required. Sarah had found her place in the military, even though it wasn't the role she had originally envisioned for herself. The mission that would define Sarah's legacy came 18 months after her first operation with the SEALs. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a remote mountain compound, but the mission parameters were unlike anything the team had attempted before. The target was protected by heavily armed guards and positioned in terrain that made traditional assault approaches extremely dangerous. The operation would require Sarah's unique combination of skills to succeed. The compound was built into a cliff face, accessible only through a narrow canyon that could easily be defended by a small force. Conventional wisdom suggested that assaulting such a position would result in heavy casualties, but Lieutenant Commander Jackson had developed a plan that relied specifically on Sarah's dual capabilities. She would provide long-range elimination of key targets while simultaneously being ready to treat casualties if the assault went wrong. Sarah had evolved significantly since her first reluctant shot in Afghanistan. She no longer struggled with the moral complexity of her role, having found a way to integrate her identity as a healer with the tactical realities of special operations. Her medical knowledge made her a better sniper, as she understood exactly how to place shots for maximum effectiveness, while her tactical training made her medical interventions more efficient and effective. The mission began with Sarah establishing an overwatch position nearly 800 meters from the target compound. This was beyond the range where most snipers operated effectively, but Sarah's skills had developed to the point where such distances were well within her capabilities. She would need to eliminate specific targets in a precise sequence to create a window of opportunity for the assault team. The first phase of the operation required Sarah to simultaneously eliminate 2 guards who could alert the compound's defenders. The shots had to be taken within seconds of each other to prevent either guard from raising an alarm. Sarah calculated wind conditions, temperature effects on bullet trajectory, and the timing required to engage both targets before either could react to the other's elimination. Both shots found their targets perfectly, and the assault team began their approach through the canyon. Sarah continued to provide overwatch, eliminating threats as they appeared while monitoring the team's progress through her scope. Her medical training allowed her to assess the effectiveness of her shots instantly, knowing whether targets were incapacitated or required follow-up engagement. Halfway through the assault, the operation encountered unexpected complications. Intelligence had underestimated the number of defenders, and the SEAL team found themselves outnumbered and taking casualties. Petty Officer Williams was hit by automatic weapons fire and went down in an exposed position, where the team couldn't reach him safely. Sarah faced a critical decision about whether to abandon her overwatch position to provide medical aid. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed her medical kit and moved toward the compound, using her rifle to clear a path through enemy positions. Her movement was precise and efficient, combining tactical movement with accurate shooting as she advanced toward the wounded SEAL. The other team members watched in amazement as she eliminated 3 enemy fighters while moving across difficult terrain under fire. Sarah reached Williams and immediately began treating his wounds while using her rifle to engage enemy positions that threatened their location. She had been hit in the shoulder by enemy fire, but continued working with characteristic calm and precision. Williams had taken multiple hits and was losing blood rapidly, requiring immediate surgical intervention that Sarah performed while bullets impacted around their position. The medical procedure Sarah performed under fire was later described by military surgeons as extraordinary. She successfully stopped internal bleeding and stabilized Williams's condition, using field techniques that most combat medics would hesitate to attempt in a hospital setting. Throughout the procedure, she continued to provide tactical support, directing other team members and engaging enemy targets when necessary. The mission concluded successfully with the target eliminated and all team members extracted alive. Williams survived his injuries and made a full recovery, crediting Sarah with saving his life under impossible circumstances. The after-action report documented her performance in terms that military leadership had never used before, describing capabilities that represented a new paradigm in special operations support. Word of Sarah's performance reached the highest levels of military command, and she became the subject of classified studies examining how her unique skill set might be replicated in other operators. She had demonstrated that the integration of medical and tactical skills could create capabilities that exceeded the sum of their parts, opening new possibilities for special operations missions. Sarah's journey from reluctant combat medic to elite special operations asset was complete, but her story continued to influence military training and doctrine long after her individual missions ended. She had proven that identity wasn't fixed, that circumstances could reveal capabilities people never knew they possessed, and that sometimes the greatest service came from accepting roles that challenged everything someone thought they knew about themselves. The SEALs who worked with her spoke of her not just as an exceptional operator, but as someone who had redefined what was possible when healing and warfare came together in the hands of someone with the courage to master both.